Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Kayla Myers, and I'm a programmer with SF DocFest. And I'm really excited to be able to talk with Alexandria and Zara about their film Street Heroines. So thank you both so much for being here today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us. We're super excited to be here.
Yeah, something that I first just really appreciate about the film in general is sort of the expansiveness of it, that it's not sort of just US centric, and then it really opens up a sort of global conversation about the graffiti and kind of the art history of graffiti and sort of public art in general. And so I think I'm really curious in terms of like how you approached researching all of these artists, a lot of them who are still, making work today, like how you went about that process and then connecting with them and sort of making them feel comfortable enough to share with you about their work, but also like to film with them, especially in the places where things are maybe getting a bit more difficult to continue to do the kind of work that they're doing.
Sure. Yeah, I'll start and then hand off to Zara because it's a very organic process. And even how I was led to Zara was very organic too, just in terms of our connections with the street art world and graffiti world and sort of art world in general. But I started this project back in 2012 and it was as a photography project. I was shooting street art and graffiti around New York City. And one day I came across two young female graph artists that were working together, painting, a mural or a piece, I should say, over at a place called 5 Points that no longer exists, but it used to be sort of this graffiti and street art mecca for artists, local artists, international artists to come and paint in the streets. So that was sort of my intro into the female side of the graffiti and street art world. And that moment made me realize I'd never considered like the female experience in the movement. So I kind of started asking questions and they told me who their influences were, but they also relayed that there weren't that many, women out there, or at least there wasn't a lot of documentation about it. So I stayed in touch with both of those artists and they kind of told me about other women in the game and then also other things that were going on. So it was sort of like this rabbit hole that I went down along with my camera and started documenting them. And that took me to Lima, Peru to see a street art festival of all women. I met a lot of artists there who were from all over Latin America and also the US. And so we just sort of stayed in touch and I just dedicated myself to, being present and going to the places they were going. And I think that's how I earned the trust and eventually sort of got introduced to the more pioneering women who had paved the way back in the 80s, like Lady Pink and also Martha Cooper, the amazing photographer. And then eventually I met Zara in 2015, 2016, and that's our paths crossed down in Miami at Art Basel, which obviously is like a big international public art destination, especially Wynwood, and especially during that art week. So she was there working with her dear friend and amazing artist, Swoon. And so we kind of just had a conversation and I don't know, Zara, I think you'd heard about the project a little bit and we'd been meaning to meet, but we finally as the world, the universe brought us together and then
right.
we kind of joined forces. And so Zara, you can talk about some of the artists that you work with and your experience and
I would say my story is very similar to Alex as well. Maybe a few years earlier, I studied art history, but had always a fascination with public art, and graffiti was naturally the perfect, segue for public art. And a lot of my friends were doing it, and I started to get interested in being into or curating more contemporary artwork. And so I knew of Lady Pink and I knew some of the older women, but at that time in the like late 90s, early 2000s, there weren't that many women on the street. And so, just kind of also organically with an interest in the street art, walking around and seeing work and And Swoon was a big anchor for me. I followed her work, and not knowing she was even a female artist. I assumed she was, a 6 foot, tall, man who went around doing these larger than life portrait repastes. And it was like, I think almost a whole year I followed her work, not knowing who she was. And then I was at a show and someone said, "Hey, that's Swoon." I said, "What?" And so I think, yeah, just this idea of being drawn to aesthetically the work, and then recognizing yourself. I mean, as females, the women who were doing this work. So I think that's where it started for me. And then, yeah, Alex and I came together, and I work with a lot of the artists who sort of came out the early street art days, both female and male counterparts. And it's been really amazing to watch their careers grow, and see how women have also, have a bigger platform for sharing their work and message.
Yeah, something that you both kind of just talked about was a lot of like thinking about documentation, which is something else that I really wanted to hear from you all, because a lot of at least the New York work, the subway sort of art and all of that is really documented by Martha Cooper, who's in the film. And I feel like a lot of the film is sort of like its own form of a documentation of the work that is being made currently, but also still referencing some of the pioneers. And so I'd love to hear you all kind of talk about that, like Martha as a sort of like like an archivist almost for these earlier works, and sort of how you all think about Street Heroines as its own sort of way of charting these artists at a particular time, but also how they're, sort of reclaiming space that maybe wasn't necessarily afforded to them or thought of as theirs, because like you said, Swoon, most people didn't think that Swoon was like a woman artist making these really incredible works. So I'd love to hear you all kind of talk about that.
Sure. Yeah. I think, just with my interest and passion for photography, like I had found out about Martha Cooper and Henry Chalfant, who did most of the documentation of the trains back in the 80s, and then finally had their book published, Subway Art, which became, this like the Bible of graffiti that spread around the world before the internet came about. So I think that tangible documentation too versus virtual documentation is extremely important. And I hope one day Street Heroines is going to be on a DVD and people can have it on their shelves or something, and possibly we can make a book too. But I think that like I said, when I met those two girls the first time painting a wall together, they couldn't really reference anything that documented what people in the past had done, except for seeing pictures of Lady Pink and Subway Art. And then also they had told me about, I think it was Graffiti Women, which was a book that had recently come out, I think around the time I'd met those ladies. So it just seemed like very little was documented. But then you think, well, maybe it's because street art is so ephemeral and here today, gone tomorrow, and it's hard to document that unless you are actually with the artist and you can catch their piece before somebody comes and tags over it or buffs it, or the government does a big like graffiti cleanup mission and they erase the whole city of graffiti like we see in the movie in Sao Paulo. So yes, I think that documentation is really important, and it's a topic that you don't only apply to what these women are doing in the streets, but also documenting protesting in the streets, documenting people that are taking a stand against something that they feel is very unjust. So, using your camera, your phone camera, to capture horrible, things that I would say entities put on the public. So even though we're documenting women and capturing their beautiful artwork, I think, and Zara probably would agree with me, like the more and more we got into editing this film and understanding like what the little nuances of importance were, was like, oh my gosh, not even, okay, the women are amazing and they're badass and it's like beautiful artwork, but literally the act, like a woman in the street and her being brave enough to go and put something on a wall, just like documenting that act, I feel is revolutionary.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to also just reiterate what Alex was saying, the film becomes, I mean, not entirely intentionally, it becomes a capsule, a time capsule, because of this movement is, you know, always changing, and even commission pieces don't last forever. So, you know, within the, you know, whether good or bad, I mean, we, you know, this making of this film is going on 10 years or so. But, you know, we see 5 Points in Queens, which no longer exists, which was, you know, a mecca for graffiti and street art for all, you know, even your European artists who were coming and doing work there, and it's gone. As well as the big highway section in Sao Paulo. Also, we've captured that, no longer exists. And, you know, in Miami, the Wynwood walls, which were the very first, mural festival that was held there. So yeah, I think we both very deeply inherently understand this importance of documentation, because we've already now have a history recorded.
Yeah, wow. It's really interesting hearing you all talk about the spaces that no longer exist anymore, especially in the form that you all film them as. That actually segues really well into another question I had about sort of space in general, because there's the space that a lot of these women are painting on, whether it's a subway or a building or some other form of like public surface. One of them at one point says, like, I didn't suffer the violence that the previous women did because like I came up after these trailblazers. And there's kind of a continued conversation throughout the film about the kind of threat of violence from like institutions like the state and the police from actually like painting in places, but also the threat that, you know, the kind of constant potential threat of violence, just being a woman, being in a very open public space. And so I'm really curious about you all's thoughts on that, but also the Brazil sort of section really focuses on that, thinking about like the move to more of a far right government, which Brazil is not alone in. It's kind of a global thing that is happening. And so I'm really curious to hear you all sort of talk about that. I'm especially thinking about the scene where she's painting and then the police officer comes and asks her to stop, and how differently that conversation could have gone. So I'm really curious to sort of hear you all talk about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. What I really love about Fusca, who's the artist in Mexico City, who says, you know, I didn't suffer as much as the women before me. They were already painting in the streets. They did the work. So I'm out here and I don't face as much violence as they did. But I also like how she puts into perspective that, you know, the idea of female and male, they're energies, right? And you can tap in, everybody has both of those energies, feminine and masculine. You can tap into your masculine energy and be more aggressive and paint with aggression and do things quick and fast, or you can tap into your feminine energy and do something that's more aesthetically pleasing and purposeful with intent. And everybody is capable of, you know, wrestling with those energies. And I think that when she goes out into the street, like she really is tapping into the balance of both. She doesn't want to call attention to herself because of the body that she's in, as because she's a woman, but she also doesn't want to deal with the harassment that can come to, like in Mexico City, of being a woman walking down the street. I mean, in New York City, any city, you know, we face it all the time. And so I think her approach to painting in the street is very interesting. She's almost like a shapeshifter. And she also, and I don't want to put words in her mouth, but it's almost like that's how she's figured out how to survive and still be able to do her art and get her message across. And, you know, she goes through this big contemplation. Is it worth it? Who am I doing the art for? And she asks these like existential questions. And then she kind of breaks it back down to basics and is like, I'm doing the art for the public good. I'm not doing it for the benefit of a government or a gallery or this or that. And I think that plays along into with the Sao Paulo artist, Magrela. You know, she's just like no holds barred. She's going to go out and do her work. She'll do it in the middle of the day. She that was the first time she'd ever been confronted by a police officer. And at that point in her 10 years of painting in the street. And I think you're totally right. I think because she was a woman versus a guy that she got off. And I think because the film crew, it was myself and two other women, my DP and my other producer who was also running sound, we kind of played into that societal role of being vulnerable and weak and, oh, we weren't, sure if this was okay or not. So I do think, I don't know, being a woman, like you find ways to make things work for you because the system is so set against you, that it's, I think you could take those experiences that you see on screen and apply them to experiences in our own everyday lives. I don't know, Zara, if you want to.
Yeah, I don't know. You said you covered a lot. I mean, I guess my head was in a slightly other place. I always think about the physicality of the work, and especially in realms of the illegal uncommissioned work. It often forces you to be in compromised situations, both physically dangerous and challenging, to get heights and to climb places. And so I always just also kind of loved it as a sport. I'm an athlete, and I love the physicality of it and the challenge that also poses on women. And so when I see, I mean, there's an artist right now who's in New York City who's getting just this woman, Anna, I don't know if you know, but she's getting huge heights. And it's just, I see it as like this, amazing feat, that she's able to conquer as well, like in the physical world. Yeah.
Hearing them talk about like all of the things that they've climbed and like all of the sort of like maneuvering that they were able to do was just completely fascinating to me as like an artist who doesn't work in that way, to consider sort of like the body and everything like that. That's really, it's a really incredible aspect of hearing all of them talk about their work. And I think my last question before we sort of get towards the end of things is connected to that, because there are so many different styles in the film, and so many different approaches to material. Like I'm thinking of the artist who makes like collages and is a much more sort of like not necessarily paint, but much more so like a mixture of paint and like physical material. And so I'm just curious in terms of like how you were like thinking about the editing of the film, but also making sure to incorporate like a wide swath of these artists' approaches to graffiti and approaches to public art. And then also, this is sort of a two-questioner thing, but I think it is Fusca who talks a little bit about like the commercialization of it and like making commissioned work versus some of the uncommissioned work that you were talking about, Zara. So if you all have any sort of like feelings about like that as well, when you were thinking about the kinds of artists that you wanted to make sure you were featuring in the film.
Yeah, because this was like a very nonlinear process, and this is the first documentary I've ever made as a filmmaker, and a feature length. But so I kind of felt like we had to find the story. Like we just had to keep documenting and keep spending time with different artists and then find what this story was. And it very much became this through line of like, okay, we have these pioneers and let's look at and see how their influences shaped where we're at now with the new emerging artists. And so I don't know if it was so much about like style and medium, but it's more about place too, because we wanted to show New York City as like this financial bastion of the world and what's going on there sort of in the underbelly. But I feel like that was very comparable to what was going on in Mexico City, which is like the financial bastion of Latin America, and then Sao Paulo, which is like the biggest city in South America. So we wanted to kind of set up these cities as like huge giants, that these women are literally like taking it to it, and in what all the different ways. So yeah, from stencil artists that we see from Swoon's work, where it's like the the work she builds in the studio, the paper cutouts, and then wheat pastes around the city, to Two Fly, where she's more prescriptive in her work and very, very talented aerosol can artist. I think definitely one of the points was to show the breadth of this artistic talent, and to show also that like graffiti is not one thing. It's not just writing your name on the wall. It's not doing, you know, like putting up a tag. It's not necessarily doing a throw up. It's like a combination of so many different things. And sure, there's like vandalism and graffiti that's illegal, but a lot of those people who've made it now in the street art world that are getting commissioned and going into the commercialization started out just by tagging their name on the wall or putting a sticker up. And so I think that it's like these artists continue to evolve. Like now, where you would see, and this is sort of like what I wanted to talk to as well, is like, where are they now? It's like, you know, they're doing amazing things, whether it's actually like 20-story buildings throughout Brazil, which Miguel is doing now, to Fusca working more with commercial clients, but like on her terms, and doing commissions for big brands, and painting, you know, their stores, to Two Fly, who continues to really do community organizing and promote other female artists, and work with her online design, graphic design business. So and I think, yeah, this can lead into like, what about the commercialization of art? And I think like with everything, women just want respect, and women want to be heard and considered. And so hopefully this film also acts as a platform to give visibility to the talent of these artists, so that they will be considered, you know, by the people who want to commission them, and who usually always look to male artists because they're the big rock star names, but maybe, you know, they need to spread their search. Zara.
Yeah, I mean, I can maybe talk a little bit to the more institutional and the gallery kind of art side of things. I mean, we're seeing a lot of artists. Swoon just had a small show at the Met Museum in New York. I mean, for graffiti to be there, I mean, that's it's really, it's taken leaps and bounds, and the medium does lend itself to a very broad, in terms of style and genre, of what you can claim it to be, but mostly that it's a free, there's a freeness to it. There's a sort of unhinged way of experimenting what your art is through the street, and where it leads you, whether it's commercial. There's a lot of artists who are working with brands, but the other side of that is also galleries and museums, and some artists choose to do neither, and stay as mural artists in the street, doing both legal and illegal work. But I think seeing the range is like Alex says, it is really important to see where you can fit in, and where, what hasn't been done yet. It's amazing to see that Alex was able to capture a Pichissau artist, a female Pichissau artist, and that was, I mean, that was 10 years ago, or how many years ago? But now I imagine there must be more female. I mean, she was just the one. So I think just watching it grow has been really, really incredible. Watching auction houses sell works of Basquiat, who initially was, a street artist, go for millions. The most expensive American art sold today was a Basquiat that sold at Christie's. So I think, commercialization, as long as the artist can be at the helm of what they're doing with their work and not being exploited, I think that's really, really important. And that, really expands through, a lot of what women do in art or in other fields.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely like an important distinction, the not being exploited and being able to still be this the steer of what you're doing and what you're creating. So yeah, I mean, Alex, you already kind of talked a little bit about what the artists are kind of up to, but I don't know if you wanted to give any other updates or any other things about what either of you may be working on next. I will say I really love that your website has like all the artists listed and you can go to all of their Instagram. So if anyone is watching this Q&A, you can look at all of the artists' work and see what they're doing currently. But I don't know if you want to provide any other updates or any other things that you all may have coming up next.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for plugging our website. It's a good resource definitely to go and discover more about each artist because we did cover a lot of them. Unfortunately, we couldn't put everyone into this cut of the feature film, but that has inspired us to continue Street Heroines in a 2.0 fashion, which would be a documentary series where we continue to still follow artists in cities around the world and put together sort of a six episode seasonal series, maybe divided by geographic locations, because over the years, a lot of people have reached out to us, or people who've seen the work in progress have also given us a heads up about other women doing amazing things in different parts of the world, in Asia, in Africa, and Europe. It's a very vibrant community right now. And I think especially too with the state of the world, that people are frustrated, and street art and graffiti is a really great form of expressing yourself. So we hope to, we're continuing to pitch that idea, and we hope to get it going next after this project. So that's sort of the biggest thing on the plate. But Street Heroines will get distribution. We're currently in talks to get our digital distribution. So hopefully it'll be available to a wider audience this fall once we do our full release. And what else? We're headed to Europe for a few more sort of non-theatrical screenings this summer. And then we are slated for a limited theatrical release in Germany this fall with an interesting boutique graffiti film distributor. So those are exciting things that are happening. And I just wanted to also say thanks again, San Francisco Documentary Festival, and a shout out to the Few and Far Women Collective, which is a collective based in the Bay Area that has a lot of female members now around the world who do graffiti and street art. And we feature a few of them in sort of one of our collective murals in the film down in Art Basel, Miami. So I hope if anyone from the crew is going to watch this Q&A, thank you. And yeah, Zara, what else are we working on?
Well, I think, getting this film released, that's a big one. And working on the 2.0 is going to be really exciting. There's still a lot of ground to cover and explore. I feel like we've barely scratched the surface. So look out for us, and we hope to bring you lots more interesting, amazing artists.
Wow. Well, that's really exciting, all of that, especially getting to like have a theatrical release in Germany. So again, thank you so much for sharing the film with us at SF Doc Fest. We're really excited to get to present it and looking forward to more of what you all do, because I totally agree. I feel like there's so much more to be explored. So thank you so much again for your time and for talking with me today. For everyone who is watching, please make sure to share that you've seen this film with other people who are watching, and that check out their website so you can learn more about the artists that are featured in the film. So thank you again and appreciate your time.
Thanks.
Thank you.